everlasting gobstoppers.
It is taught that like a gobstopper or jawbreaker, there is a general prevalence of layers about the Earth of similar type sediment, containing similar fossils. This is the famous geologic column. At a very obvious and apparent level, the claim of the geologic column doesn't make sense. That, number one, layers surround the whole Earth, while, number two, the layers get progressively much older as they go down. How can that be? Then where did the matter come from? What unblocked path could the matter follow to get to that location? The existing matter has its path blocked by the previous global layers from getting to where each new global layer will be made. The previous global layers are in the way of the new global layers. So did the matter fall from space? Nobody is proposing this, and we have not seen occasional dumps of sediment from space capable of burying a fossil before it decomposes, but it is the only mechanism which could achieve global layers which get successively much older with depth. How do some make such a big error, and what would make something so impossible feel intuitive? I suspect it comes from misapplying the after effects of a human activity observed by archaeologists. Because of the lighter construction and more powerful equipment, modern buildings are removed when their use has ended. In the past, buildings were often made of stone, so it was less work to fill them with dirt than construct the next building on top. In the city, dirt was carried into. With time the surface went up, but of course, somewhere else, where the dirt was dug from, with time the surface went down. And was this process geological? Did it happen by itself? No, it was the directed actions of thinking people. So can the principle that lower is progressively older be applied to natural processes? Not logically. That is bad science. One situation is not applicable to the other. It makes as much sense as claiming patina must contain chlorophyll because it is green, though that may have a science-y ring to it. So deeper being much older for the entire planet by natural means doesn't make sense to begin with. What is the process which is supposed to have caused this, and is it a mechanism which could create concentric layers at all? That would be the uniformitarian process, the same processes we see acting around the Earth now. So here and there, local areas that are uplifted and eroded down, then other local areas, over and over. This process, by its very definition, is utterly incapable of producing layers which are the same all around the planet, but in fact is effective to scramble and destroy such layers were they already present, especially over immense amounts of time acting. There is an uplift in a location, and erosion starts to remove the uplifted area. We notice that the top is eroded away first, and the first material deposited is what was removed from the top. So there's an inverting of top for bottom in this layer and in each layers. Also, here we see the top of the first layers being eroded, but at a different location, deeper down into it's being eroded. So what's being deposited is a mixture of different depths within that layer. As erosion continues, it starts cutting into the second layer. The proportion of the two is varying. Over time, we start getting a larger proportion coming from the second layer, and that's reflected in what we see being deposited here. As erosion continues, we start cutting into the scrambled first and second layer and start cutting into the bottom layer. Increasingly so, we start getting more and more of it as we progress, and that's reflected in its color showing up more on the outer surface. Now imagine the process being repeated. Another local uplift, maybe here or maybe here, cutting through the scrambled new layers and scrambling them even more. What you just saw was with me portraying the process in a way easier to see on the screen, which grants it an unrealistic advantage. This enormous Olympic Mons mountain has erosion runoff that reaches halfway around the world. This is not representative of processes we see acting today. Upheavals and how far the sediments of their erosion travels is much more local. Everything this process does is at odds with what it is proposed to explain. Whenever putting down a certain deposit, it is necessarily always local, never global. It is incapable of creating global horizontal layers, but conversely scrambles them by inverting them and mixing them in constantly varying ratios. It does not inherently deposit horizontal layers, but can also deposit diagonal bands like river deltas and layers of constantly varying angles. Finally, let's look at the global deluge model as described in the Bible. Is it capable of producing concentric layers of sediments on the whole earth? In this method, you start with all kinds of sediments in aqueous suspension. The different sediments settle out at different times according to properties like particle size, density, aquadynamic shape, solubility, and buoyancy. So this problem we've been talking about of the matter of one layer getting past or not being blocked by the matter of another layer is very effectively solved by them to begin with all magically being superimposed on each other to occupy the same space by being suspended in water together. Note that the simplified animation has left out any layer or layers which drop down with the surface of the water. But, voila, the only process which can produce a Gob Stopper Earth.
Everlasting Gob Stoppers.